Barack Obama talking there in Washington. Well, Professor Geoffrey Garrett is the Chief Executive Officer of the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. He joins me now in the studio. Professor, thanks for your time this evening.
My pleasure.
So who do you think will blink first here?
Well, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? We've seen this happen before. Everyone's looking back to 1995 when it was Bill Clinton against Newt Gingrich, and now we have Barack Obama against the new Tea Party Republicans, although Obama, interestingly, I think is trying to pull back from the fray a little bit. And, this is a really tough one. You've got two powerful sentiments in American politics at the moment. They're both about the economy. One is the unemployment rate is too high, and the second is that the deficit is too high. So the Republicans say attack the deficit by cutting spending. The Democrats say we can't afford to do that because we've got to tackle unemployment.
Now, we just heard the President outlining some of what may come this weekend. Who's he aiming at there? What's his motivation? Is he informing the public, or is he trying to paint the Republicans into a corner?
Well, he's clearly trying to paint the Republicans into a corner. If you ask the question who in the short term loses if the government shuts down, it's the 800,000 or so government workers who would not be getting paid next week. What he wants to say is that this would really derail the still somewhat fragile American recovery, with that unemployment number being the most important one. I think at the moment, or rather if we look at the last 2 months, essentially since the Tea Party Republicans have been in power, they're the ones who blinked. Maybe they think that they've got to bring it to a head now and do this government shutdown. But I think at some level, that's more about the symbolism than the reality. The big story is going forward in the American economy. Are we going to have massive spending cuts, or are the Democrats going to be able to raise taxes? That's the big question going forward.
If you stare into your crystal ball there, what do you think the answer will be to those two big questions?
Well, the problem in American politics is that you always put off into the future the tough challenges. And, they called Obama's budget this year kicking the can down the road. Mm-hmm. There are massive entitlement programs. The biggest one is healthcare. The second biggest has to do with retirements. Obama's budget, which is really a forward projection for the next 5 or 6 years, didn't touch those programs. The Republicans are saying enough's enough. We've got to cut those programs. Is the American public ready for that? I think all the polling would say no. So probably the best prediction we've got is a lot of political fighting, a lot of political theatre, but American deficits are here for the medium term.
This is obviously putting a lot of pressure on Obama and his administration. But you mentioned the Tea Party a moment ago. What about the pressure on the Republican speaker here, John Boehner, throughout all of this? Because that conservative Tea Party movement had some very clear ideas about just how big a cut they wanted made to bring that deficit down.
Absolutely. They came in and they said, listen, we want $100 billion out of the budget this year in 2011. I think what we've seen in this period of notional Republican control of Congress is, in fact, division in the Republican Party. John Boehner, the Speaker, used to be considered quite a conservative guy, but now he looks moderate. The Tea Party Republicans are the ones who are out for red meat. They have a new hero in Paul Ryan, who's put together an extraordinary budget plan going forward. Boehner has to try to hold the Republicans together, and I think what we see is that it was so much easier for them to be the party of no in 2009 and 2010. Now they've got to be a constructive governing party, and it's just much harder.
So further to that, you mentioned right at the start that the Americans have been through this before during the Clinton era. Is this a case of history repeating? Because when the Republicans took the hard line back then, and this occurred back in the Clinton era, it actually backfired on them from memory, and Clinton was propelled forward to a second term.
Yeah, and what Bill Clinton did defend the same programs. In fact, it was Social Security and Medicare, the two big entitlement programs. Clinton said, I'm going to defend those, and he won. But there are two big differences, I think, between today and 1995. The first one is that the US economy is just not in nearly as good shape as it was then. That makes conditions harder, I think, for the incumbent president in particular. The second is that the fiscal outlook on Social Security and Medicare is just far worse now. We're 15 years later, 15 years more of those baby boomers going through the system and getting ready for retirement. So the alarm bell is ringing more loudly now. Having said all of that, I still think that the winning political path is the one Obama is taking, which is to say, listen, these are core parts of the American economy in the longer run. It's part of our social contract with the American people. We must look after retirees. We must look after health care. And then he says today, listen, you can't derail the recovery, and that's what the Republicans want to do. And then he has the third element, the advantage of being the president, which is he says, this is Congress's problem, so he can wag the finger at them and say, now, come on, you be grown-ups, you've got to solve this problem. So I actually think, the first part of 2011 has been good for Obama. You might think that this is, a crisis waiting to happen. I expect actually it'll play quite well for him.
How quickly do you think this deal will be done?
Well, what they've done in the past, we're already 6 months into a fiscal year. There is no budget. These are continuing resolutions. I've seen talk of another now a 1-week extension. They can keep extending this until we get to the next fiscal year. In fact, the 2012 budget is already the one that's being debated. So, this is an old thing in American politics. You operate on continuing resolutions. At the moment, I think you'd have to say that would be the favourite outcome for this weekend.
It's going to be a long weekend for America, I suspect. Professor Geoffrey Garrett from the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney, I thank you for your time and knowledge tonight.
My pleasure.